When I want to add a 3D layer in SMODE by right-clicking in the elements tree, we can see that we have different categories. We have meshes that contain planes, boxes, capsules, cylinders, different types of spheres and toruses. We can create splines, such as circles, knots, rectangles, stars, etc. We've got a category that shows points. We can create points on a grid, a particle system, or random points. And we've got this last category in which we can create null objects as well as groups. And so if we want to go deeper and see what constitutes a 3D layer in SMODE, let's create, for example, a plane. When we create it, we can notice that this layer is constituted of different tabs, same as for all 2D layers, for example. We have the generator options, we also have the renderer options, and we also have placement options. These options represent the placement of our 3D object within SMODE's 3D space. And so for a quick reminder to easily access SMODE's 3D space, you can click on this button here within the viewport. And also, if we double click on the viewport, we can access the full view window, which allows us to easily move 3D objects with more precision. And so now if we head back to our 2D view, we can focus on the render tab and the parameters that are contained within it. So when we're in this render category, we can see that the type is PBR surface. If I unfold my 3D object here, we can see that there are different layers and they represent the different parts of PBR rendering. And so we can change this renderer type. Instead of, for example, showing the PBR surface, I can ask it to show only lines with the thick lines renderer. And you can see now that the different components contained within the 3D object have changed. We now have access to the thick lines renderer options. If I had chosen another renderer, for example the sprite points renderer, we can now see that the components contained within the 3D object have changed once again. We now have access to a 2D layer, which represent one of the options of our sprite point renderer. And so each and every one of those renderer types will have their own specific options. And now if we switch back to the PBR surface renderer, and if we do a right click on the plane, here we can see that we have a category called renderers. And so similar to 2D layers, we can add another renderer to our 3D object. So in this case, we can select a thick lines renderer. And so right now we're displaying both our PBR renderer and the thick lines renderer simultaneously. For example, if we select one of these two renderers, in this case thick lines, and we change its position coordinates, we can see that we're modifying the position of only the thick lines renderer and not the whole 3D object. The plane is being rendered as thick lines with this position. I could also add another renderer, for example a sprite points renderer, and change its position also. At its root, it still is the same plane. If I go in its generator options and I alter its size parameter, we can see that it's modifying the three renderers at the same time. And the same goes for the precision parameter. If I set the plane to be 5 by 5, we can see the way the renderers will represent this 5 by 5 grid in their own specific ways. In their case, less lines or less dots, as the precision has changed. We also have the ability to group 3D objects together. And there are two group types. If in my composition I have a box and a sphere, like so, I can select those two 3D layers. I could do right click and either click on group or use the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-G. This has created a group. Within it we can create a timeline, and we also have the option to modify its position, size, rotation, etc. If I unfold this group, we can see that we have access to both renderers for both 3D objects. The box can be red, and the sphere can be cyan. But there also is a second group type. I'll quickly redo our example and create a box and a sphere. I can select those two 3D layers once again, do a right click, and this time I will select the option Group Generators. This time the shortcut is Ctrl-Shift-Alt-G. When we select this option, SMODE will ask us which renderer we want to use as a base. If I choose to use the renderer of the sphere, it will create another group type. This time, the sphere and the box will be using a common renderer. In this case, a PBR surface. In this case, it's impossible to make the cube red and the sphere blue only by going through the albedo. The two 3D models are using the same renderer.